Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Strap in, because tonight I'm sharing 10 true and deeply unsettling accounts of legendary encounters from the state of California. Each one of these stories carries that unique blend of local folklore and tangible terror that sticks with you long after the tale is told. Before we dive into the darkness, if you're new here, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to like this video and share it with anyone who loves a good scare. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Alright, let's begin. I just moved out of my parents' place in Belmont and decided the quickest way to survive financially was to transfer to Darnell County Community College. City rent was astronomical, and moving back into my childhood bedroom felt like a massive step backward. My cousin Maddie offered a solution. I could stay with her and her dad, Hank, on their property just outside the town of Everland. It wasn't glamorous, but it was free, and I wasn't in a position to be choosy. The place was profoundly isolated. A single-story house that looked like it had been dropped there in the 1960s and then utterly forgotten. Paint curled away from the siding in long strips, and the front porch sagged ominously. Beyond it, acres of brittle land stretched out in every direction, broken only by rows of ancient, non-producing grapevines, just dry, claw-like stems and dust. Still, I was grateful. Hank didn't ask for rent, just that I help out where I could, mending fences, clearing brush, making sure the pipes didn't freeze. Maddie was cool and easy to be around, though she maintained a strange distance from certain parts of the property, especially the ditch that cut through the land's edge. Everyone in town called it death. It wasn't impressive. Just a shallow, winding depression in the earth, maybe a foot deep, utterly dry and barren, like an old scar left by a river that had simply wandered off. I thought it was nothing, but the locals clearly didn't. My first day, the old man at the gas station asked where I was staying. When I told him Hank's place off Hollyage Road, he just stared and said, "That land's thin." When I asked what he meant, he looked at me like I was stupid. Then he added, "If you hear it at night, keep your damn mouth shut." Others offered similar warnings. Don't whistle back. Don't step in it barefoot. Don't let it know your name. It felt like a joke at first, a local prank, except no one was laughing. Even Hank had rules. He wasn't a talker, but one evening he looked out the kitchen window and said, "If you hear anything from the channel after dark, lock the door. Stay inside." Then he went back to slicing potatoes as if he hadn't just delivered a line from a nightmare. For the first week, nothing happened. I went to class, helped around the house, and binged TV with Maddie. I slept deeply, soothed by the profound quiet. Then, small things started vanishing. A flashlight from my desk. A charger. A single sneaker. I thought I was misplacing them until Maddie started losing things too. A weird tension settled between us. Then, one night around midnight, I heard the locks clicking, one by one. I peeked out my door to see Hank moving through the house with a crowbar in one hand and an old glass jar in the other. He was dipping his fingers into it, smearing something thick and dark over the door frames and window ledges. His face wasn't scared, just intensely focused. The next morning, when Maddie asked, he just said, "Keeping the house in the living." That's when the whistling started. 3:05 a.m. 3 notes. Low, sharp, high. Then silence. It happened again the next night. And the next. Then came the dirt. Maddie screamed one morning, standing on her bed, pointing at a perfect, intentional circle of loose soil surrounding it. We told Hank. He looked at it and flatly stated, "It found a way in." He then walked out and sat in his truck facing the house for the rest of the day, a shotgun across his knees. The sheriff came, took notes, and said the land had a bad streak. He suggested cameras. We got a motion light instead. It went off constantly, revealing nothing, always followed by that 3-note whistle from the channel. One morning, Hank was just gone. His truck was there, door open, keys in the ignition. 2 days later, we found 2 long, parallel grooves in the dirt, dragging from the truck toward the channel. We left that night and never went back. The house has changed hands multiple times since, no one stays long. The last time I checked, that single property was blurred out on Google Maps. Maddie still gets sleep paralysis, hearing those 3 notes. And sometimes, I jolt awake at 3:05 a.m., the air in the room feeling wrong, like the land itself remembers. If you ever hear a whistle like that, don't answer. Don't follow. And whatever you do, don't leave the door open. I was 15 when I first heard the stories about a place everyone called Hollow Creek. It was just another stretch of dry land tucked behind the hills near Whitlow. They said the creek bed changed, not over years, but in real time. Paths would twist into new routes, walls of earth would appear where there had been none, and familiar turns would suddenly lead you somewhere completely different. Most adults wrote it off as small-town superstition, the desert heat playing tricks on the mind. But even if they didn't believe it, they never encouraged anyone to go out there either. That summer, right before school started, a few of us decided to go see for ourselves. It was a dare, really. A mission to prove it was all nothing. There were 6 of us, bored, restless kids looking for a thrill. We had no real plan, just backpacks with water and a reckless amount of confidence. One of us was a kid named Rook. That wasn't his real name, but it fit. He was quiet, hard to read, and some people mistakenly thought he was slow. But those of us who knew him understood he noticed things the rest of us missed. He had a sharpness that only revealed itself when you paid close attention. That we set out early to beat the heat, hiking past the last houses of Whitlow until we felt like we were in another world. The hills were wide and empty, all sunburned stone and dry grass. The creek wasn't hard to find. It was a deep, quiet trench clawed into the land, utterly silent. No water, no sound. We slid down into it, and the world immediately felt muted. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of our footsteps on the dry dirt. The walls rose high, sometimes blocking out the sky. We dropped our bags and split up, staying within earshot. Rook, full of energy, darted ahead as usual, pointing out animal tracks and oddly bent branches, vanishing and reappearing farther down the creek bed. Then, he didn't reappear. We waited, figuring he was hiding, ready to jump out and scare us. We called his name. Nothing. We shouted louder. Still nothing. We walked around the next bend, expecting a prank, but the creek was empty. A quiet, unnerving silence had settled in. We split into pairs, thinking he'd wandered down a side path. But the farther we went, the less the place made sense. Turns that should have looped back led to dead ends. Open spaces now had walls. A gentle slope had become a sharp drop. It wasn't just unfamiliar, it was fundamentally wrong that we climbed out to get a better view, but from above, it just looked like a normal, shallow crack in the land. When we climbed back down, everything had shifted again. The stretch we just left was gone, replaced by steep dirt walls and a bend we'd never seen. It was as if the ground was folding itself into new shapes every time we looked away. We called for Rook until our voices were raw, marking the walls with rocks and sticks, but the marks would vanish or appear in the wrong places. By mid-afternoon, we were sunburned, exhausted, and deeply scared. We left because there was nothing else we could do. Telling his parents was the worst part. We stammered through it, saying he'd wandered off and we'd lost him. We never mentioned the shifting paths or the impossible walls. We knew how it would sound. The town launched a massive search. Parties combed the hills, helicopters buzzed the ridges, and dogs sniffed through the dust. They found nothing. No trace. No sign. Just silence. And then, life just moved on. But for us, it never did. Years dragged me forward, college, a job, marriage, kids. I built a life, but Rook's absence was always there, an unfinished sentence in the back of my mind. Then, one summer while visiting family in Whitlow, my dad mentioned something offhand over breakfast. Construction crews were digging out near Hollow Creek for a new development. They'd found bones. I stopped breathing. They identified the remains. It was Rook. The coroner found no signs of foul play. The official conclusion was that he got trapped, maybe buried in a landslide. Something simple. Something neat. But we had been right behind him. We had searched every inch. There was no landslide, no trap. The creek had taken him. Before they paved it over, I went back one last time. The place looked smaller, broken, half filled with debris as if someone had tried to erase it. I didn't stay long. Back then, I believed a landscape could be just a place. Now I know better. Some places are hungry. Back then, I was working the overnight shift at a warehouse just outside of Auburn. The hours were midnight to 6, not the worst job I'd ever had, but they completely wrecked my sleep schedule. The 45-minute drive home to my small, forgettable town was a daily grind. Most nights, I took the freeway, it was faster and better lit. But sometimes, when I was wired from too much cheap coffee, I'd take the back roads. They were quieter. No blinding headlights, no semis on my bumper. Just fields, orchards, and the occasional deer. That particular night, it was almost 3 in the morning when I turned onto Prairie Road. It looped behind old citrus farms toward the edge of town. A little slower, but peaceful. Familiar. Not long after I turned onto that stretch, I passed the old fruit stand. I'd seen it 100 times, a hand-built wooden stall with faded red paint and a sun-bleached sign. No one had sold anything there in years. The roof sagged, and vines were slowly claiming it. I usually didn't even notice it anymore. But that night, just after I passed it, I saw it was a pale blue sedan, parked awkwardly on the shoulder, its nose angled toward the ditch. The headlights were on, and I could see the faint puff of exhaust in the cold air. I slowed down, thinking it was a breakdown or someone pulled over to sleep. Cell service was practically non-existent out there. I pulled up behind it, flipped my hazards on, and got out. I didn't see anyone through the windows. I walked up to the driver's side. The engine was still idling, steady and low. The doors were locked, windows up. I knocked lightly on the glass. No movement. I leaned closer, cupping my hands to block the glare, and turned on my flashlight. The driver's seat was empty. The passenger seat was empty. No purse, no jacket. The interior was clean but worn. I checked the back seat. Nothing. It was strange, but not alarming. I figured the driver had gone to find help. But why leave the car running? Why lock the doors? Something felt off. I circled the car, shining my light around. No damage. No flat tires. I wrote down the license plate on a sticky note, just in case, got back in my truck, and drove away, watching the sedan's twin headlights shrink in my rearview mirror. That I didn't think about it again until a few minutes later when I stopped for coffee at a gas station. As I walked back to my truck, my phone buzzed. It was Mateo, a guy from the warehouse who also took the back roads. He asked if I'd seen a car parked near the old fruit stand. I said, yeah, a blue sedan, headlights on. There was a long pause. Then he said, there was someone in it when I passed. The way he said it, not spooked, but insisting, made my stomach turn. He said she was in the driver's seat, head down like she was passed out or worse. I told him the car was empty when I looked. He sounded confused, then went quiet. I didn't ask more questions. I just turned around and drove back, leaving the coffee behind. The drive back felt longer. When I pulled up, the scene had changed. The sedan was still there, but now the driver's side door was wide open. And there she was. A woman, maybe in her 60s, slumped halfway out of the car. One leg was on the gravel, her torso twisted awkwardly. She wore a pale, hand-knitted cardigan with little embroidered flowers. I crouched down and touched her wrist. It was ice cold. Her skin had a waxy, stiff feel to it. I stood up fast, my heart hammering, and called 911. Highway patrol and an ambulance showed up. One officer took my statement. I told him I'd checked the car 30 minutes earlier and it was empty. He was skeptical. "Are you sure you didn't miss her?" She was slumped forward. I swore I looked. I used a flashlight. Later, a detective had me come to the station. He showed me grainy footage from a traffic camera down the road. It clearly showed me pulling up, walking around the car, my flashlight beam sweeping through both front windows. No one was inside. The woman wasn't there. Then he told me the coroner's estimate. Time of death was around 10 p.m. She'd been dead for hours before I even arrived. And based on the evidence, she'd been in that upright position in the car for most of that time. The report listed it as natural causes. Case closed. But the story spread. Truckers and night shift workers started calling her the lady in blue. Some said she'd been spotted before, sitting in parked cars or standing near the fruit stand at dawn. I don't know what it was, a ghost, a glitch, a bad night's sleep. All I know is what I saw, and what I didn't see, until it was far too late. Now, when I see a car pulled over, especially a pale blue one, I don't stop. I don't even slow down. I just keep my eyes on the road and I drive. I'd been driving north along the coast, just past a little town called Cypress Glen, after spending the day with an old friend in Fairpoint. We'd caught up over crab rolls and sickly sweet iced tea, and I'd stayed much later than planned. By the time I hit the road, it was close to midnight, and the stretch of Highway 49 winding along the cliffs was nearly deserted. It felt like I was the only person left in the world, just my headlights, the hum of the engine, and the dark, empty road. The Pacific was a vast, black void somewhere off to my left. I wasn't even that tired, just a little zoned out, music playing softly. I had half a bottle of water in the passenger seat, but I decided to pull over for a minute to stretch my legs and drink without sloshing it everywhere. I found a wide dirt turnout, the kind that looked like it had a past but no future, just gravel, weeds, and a busted guardrail leaning toward the drop. No signs, no lights. I pulled in slowly, killed the engine but left the keys in the ignition, and the music faded out. The silence was immediate. No cars, just the soft ping of the cooling exhaust. I grabbed my phone to check the time and my GPS. I tapped the screen. Nothing. I pressed the side button. Still black. That was weird, I was sure it had around 20% battery left. I held the power button, and it buzzed weakly in my hand like a dying insect, but the screen stayed dead. Then I looked at the dashboard. The digital clock was blank. The radio display was dead, emitting only a soft, empty static from the speakers. Yet the engine was still purring, smooth and steady. No warning lights, no sputtering. A creeping disconnect settled over me, what I could hear and what I could see were telling two different stories. I rolled down the window to get some air and immediately noticed something else. There was no sound outside. I don't mean it was quiet. I mean silence. A total, profound absence. No wind rustling the brush, no insects, no distant crash of waves from the cliffs below. It was artificial, deafening. The kind of silence that makes your own ears ring. I got out of the car, and the crunch of my boots on the gravel was shockingly loud, an intrusion that didn't belong. That's when I saw it. A light, maybe 50 or 60 yards down the road, just past the next curve. A pale, bluish glow, dim and flickering as if seen through water. It swayed slowly from side to side in a hypnotic rhythm. At first, I thought it was a flashlight, but there was no bounce, no shifting shadows. Just this steady, swaying arc, like it was hanging from something. Then the glow dimmed slightly, brightened, and dimmed again. It looked like it was breathing. And then I saw the shape. Something crossed the road near the light. It wasn't a person. It was too tall. Impossibly tall and thin, with arms and legs that were too long. It didn't walk. It slid. Its movements were all wrong, fluid and silent, covering ground far too quickly. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear, my grandfather's voice, telling spooky local legends when I was a kid. One was about something called the Tall One. He said it lived near the cliffs and came out on silent nights. He said it didn't walk. He said if you see it move sideways, don't follow it. I had no intention of following it, but I instinctively took a half step forward for a better look past the car door. The second I shifted my weight, my stomach dropped. It was that feeling of missing the last step on a staircase, a sudden, weightless plunge. My arms tingled, everything seemed to flip inside out, and then there was just blackness. No sound, no sensation. Just gone that I blinked. I was back in the driver's seat. Both hands were on the wheel, my seatbelt was fastened. The engine was still running. The radio was back on, playing that same soft static, but the display was lit. The dashboard clock read 5:07. Outside, the world had returned, I could hear the ocean roaring, the wind, distant gulls. But I wasn't in the same place. This turnout was paved, with a metal picnic bench and a faded hiking trail sign I didn't recognize. The glowing light and the tall shape were gone. I reached for my water jug. The lid was off, sitting neatly on the passenger seat. The jug itself was completely empty, yet the fabric underneath was bone dry. I hadn't spilled it. My backpack, which I always keep on the passenger seat, was now behind me, wedged on the floor as if it had been tossed there. I drove the rest of the way home on autopilot, pulling over twice just to breathe and feel the solid road under my tires. When I got to my apartment, I checked my phone. The battery was fine. I opened my GPS timeline. There was a clean, 5-hour gap between 12:14 a.m. and 5:07 a.m. No stops logged, no location data. Just a hole in my night. I tried to write it off as stress, but one detail stuck with me, a real-world anchor in the surrealness, a white utility van, parked backward in the opposite turnout. Its hazard lights were dimly blinking. It hadn't been there when I first pulled over, but when I came to, it was there, in the exact same position. Later, I dug into obscure California folklore. I found forums, old threads describing the same silence, the same dead electronics, the same glowing blue light near cliffs. They had different names for it, the Lantern Man, the Watcher of the Ridgeline, the Tall One. The stories were always the same. And they always ended with someone waking up somewhere they didn't drive to, with no memory of the time in between. I don't know what I saw out there. I don't know what poured out my water or buckled my seatbelt. But I know it wasn't just a story. When I was 20, I headed out to the hills past Elbridge with two guys I'd known since high school. It was one of those last-minute, poorly planned weekends. We'd heard about a stretch of road called Jasper Hollow from a guy at a gas station who swore it was cursed. Not the kind with a jumping ghost, but the kind people talked about in low voices, vanishing acts, messed up accidents, voices from the trees at night. We wrote it off as small-town nonsense, but it was exactly the kind of nonsense we enjoyed. The road was about 40 minutes out, tucked behind a boarded-up warehouse. By the time we got there, it was after 2 in the morning. The road ended abruptly, as if someone had taken a blowtorch to the pavement, leaving behind cracked gravel and tall weeds. We parked on the shoulder near a rusted guardrail. Orange trees stretched out on both sides in tight, ruler-straight rows, but they looked strangely abandoned, half-pruned and forgotten. We left the headlights on, popped a cooler of cheap beer, and sat on the hood, drinking and trying to scare each other with dumb stories. At first, it was just us being idiots. My friend Mason claimed he saw a coyote. Another friend, Oliver, dared me to climb the canal fencing, which I did until I realized the metal was slick with something that smelled like old oil. But the whole time, I kept glancing back at the car. It felt like it was getting farther away every time I looked. Then Oliver went quiet. "You hear that?" he asked. We listened. He swore it sounded like tires slowly crunching over gravel, but there were no headlights, no engine. We shrugged it off. Then a man stepped out from between the trees. Not from the road, but from deep within the orchard itself. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an old jacket that was too tight at the elbows and pants that flared out at the bottom, like something from a 70s catalog. He walked right through us as if we weren't even there and slammed his shoulder into Mason, knocking his beer into his lap. We all stood up. Mason cursed and shoved him. "Watch it." The guy just stumbled back and looked at us. His face was completely blank. No surprise, no anger. Nothing. I stepped forward, pissed off, and shoved him harder. "Back off or swing," I told him. He didn't. He just stared for a second, a flicker of something close to fear in his eyes, and then he muttered 4 words, "I'll come back with mine. Not my friends. Not my people. Just mine." We laughed. It was ridiculous. He turned and disappeared back into the trees the same way he came. We went back to drinking, the tension fading. The temperature dropped. The radio started cutting in and out. We were talking again when something cracked hard against the side of my skull. I saw white and fell. Another hit landed on the back of my neck, and I dropped to the ground. Then I felt the cold, unmistakable press of a gun barrel against my temple. I looked up. It was him. The same guy. Only now, he wasn't alone. A dozen men stood in a line at the edge of the orchard. But they didn't look real. They stood too still. No one shifted, no one breathed. Their eyes were locked on me. Every single one of them. The man with the gun cocked it, slow and deliberate. Then he started talking. He repeated everything I'd said to him earlier, every insult, every challenge, word for word, with this dry, uneven laugh underneath, like he was mocking the very shape of the words. Then he told me to say it again, the name I'd called him. He waited, the gun still pressed to my head. And I did it. I shouted it, my voice cracking. That's when the group behind him broke into laughter all at once. But it wasn't normal laughter. It sounded layered and wrong, like one laugh split into different bodies, choppy and echoing unnaturally off the trees. Then, without warning, the man dropped his arm, turned his back, and started walking. The others followed. They didn't walk right, though. Their legs moved, but their torsos didn't sway. They just receded, sliding back into the orchard. The laughter faded with them into silence. I stayed on the ground for a long time. When I finally stood, the trees were still. The car was there, but Oliver and Mason were gone. No struggle, no blood. Just gone. I didn't call their names. The idea of my voice carrying into those trees made my skin crawl. I got in the car and drove. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station 5 miles away. I didn't go home that night. I went to my cousin's place and crashed without explaining. The next morning, I tried calling them. Both lines were disconnected. I went to their apartments. Oliver's was empty, mailbox stuffed with flyers. Mason's landlord said no one by that name had ever rented the unit. I asked around town. No one remembered them. Not even at the bar we went to every Friday for 2 years. It was like they had been lifted out of the world and scrubbed clean. I moved out of Elbridge within the week. I haven't been back. My cousin Ezra had an obsession with obscure folklore. He didn't care about ghosts or haunted houses, he was drawn to the lesser-known things, the stories most people never heard. So when he brought up the Dark Watchers, I barely paid attention. I figured it was just another one of his weird Reddit deep dives. But a few days later, he texted me, asking if I wanted to drive out to the Sinantio Range to hike the trails where sightings supposedly happened. He said it would be a good way to clear our heads during winter break. He even offered to pay for gas, and since I was broke, that was the main reason I said yes. That, and sheer boredom. We left in the early afternoon. The drive was about 2 hours, and we didn't talk much. Mostly just music and him rehashing the legends. According to Ezra, the watchers were shadowy figures people had reported for decades, tall, silent shapes standing on mountain ridges, just watching. They never moved, never chased anyone. It sounded like complete nonsense, but I figured the hike itself would be decent. By late afternoon, we parked at a gravel turnout along a forest road. The air was crisp, the sky turning a deep gold. It was quiet. Too quiet, but I didn't register that yet. The trail wasn't marked. It was just a narrow dirt path cut into the slope, threading between dry brush and low trees. The view was pretty, and for the first half hour, it felt like a normal hike. Ezra kept stopping to take pictures of rocks and animal tracks. Eventually, I checked the time and suggested we head back. He gave me the usual, just a little farther, line, saying there was a ridge with a better view up ahead. I agreed, more out of laziness than curiosity. We rounded a bend, and Ezra froze. He didn't speak, just raised his arm and pointed. I followed his gaze and saw it too, a figure standing alone on the ridge line above us. It was so still I thought it might be a twisted tree or a strange rock formation. But no, it had a definite human shape, tall, thin, with arms slightly held out from its sides. It had no features, no face, no color. Just a dark, solid outline against the pale sky. I waited for Ezra to laugh or make a joke, but he just stared. He pulled out his phone and tried to zoom in. The screen flickered, then filled with digital static. Not just blurriness, actual, crackling static. He lowered the phone, his face pale. I tried to stay calm, suggesting it was just a hiker, but the thing was far too tall to be a normal person, and it hadn't moved a muscle. We kept walking, not saying another word, trying to pretend nothing had happened. Eventually, I glanced back. The figure was gone. Not walked away. Just vanished, as if someone had switched it off. The trail then dropped down into a ravine. The walls closed in, and the light faded quickly. The air grew cold, a sharp, unnatural cold, as if the warmth had been sucked out of the space. Then Ezra stopped again. There, on the path ahead of us, were 2 sets of footprints. One set was mine. The other matched his boots exactly, same tread, same wear, same stride. The problem was, we hadn't walked through this ravine yet. We were looking at our own footprints, waiting for us up ahead. We stared at them, trying to find a logical explanation. Ezra tried to laugh it off, suggesting someone else had the same boots, but his voice was thin. We decided to keep going, just to see how far the prints went. The deeper we went, the heavier the air felt, like we were pushing against something invisible. I turned on my flashlight. The beam lit up the ravine walls, catching patches of moss and gnarled roots. Then the light landed on something just ahead. Another figure, standing right in the middle of the path, about 15 feet away. Same height, same stillness. The beam hit it directly, but it didn't reflect any light. It just absorbed it. I shouted, "Who's there?" No response. Ezra took a step forward, and I instinctively grabbed his arm, yanking him back. Right then, the figure slid sideways into the rock wall. No turn, no sound. It was as if the solid stone opened and swallowed it. We didn't wait. We turned and walked back fast, almost at a jog, but something was wrong. The trail didn't match what we remembered. Curves were in the wrong places, large boulders were missing. My flashlight started flickering erratically, despite having brand new batteries. The silence was absolute, swallowing the sound of our own footsteps. I tried to speak, but my voice came out flat and dead. Then we saw the ridge again. Now there were two figures side by side, unmoving, watching us from above. We ran. We didn't stop until we saw the car. As soon as the doors were shut and locked, the oppressive pressure lifted. We drove away fast, not looking back. The next morning, Ezra deleted every picture from the trip. When I asked why, he just said, "They weren't ours." The only thing I kept was the flashlight. I still have it. It's never worked right since. I was 15 the summer I went to stay with my uncle in a town called Mirador, out in the Salinas Valley. He managed irrigation for the local farms, which meant long shifts and weird hours, so most days it was just me and my cousin Leo, left to our own devices. The drive up from LA was long and hot. To pass the time, my uncle told stories, the usual California ghost stuff, mission hauntings, cursed highways. But one story stuck with me. He talked about a woman, not the famous weeping one, but something older. She belonged to the dry riverbed that cut through the valley. He said you could find her on the back roads after dark, especially near an old concrete bridge the workers called the South Span. He described her as tall, impossibly so, with hair long enough to sweep the dirt behind her. And he said she had a thing about windows. She'd just stand and watch, not blinking, just staring. He gave me a look, half joking, half serious, and told me not to go near that bridge after sunset. Naturally, I laughed it off. I was a city kid, legends were for Halloween. But the bridge was only a 10-minute bike ride from the house. The more time I spent near it, the harder it was to ignore. It wasn't much to look at, just cracked concrete arches covered in layers of faded graffiti. Underneath the middle span, someone had painted a name. It looked decades old, but the letters were weirdly clear, curled up as if they'd melted against the concrete. Leo said it was the name of a girl who'd vanished in a flood a long time ago, but he didn't know more than that. The name just sat there, under the bridge, like it was waiting. During the third week, on one of those slow, heavy evenings, boredom got the better of us. Leo and I grabbed our flashlights and bikes and pedaled out to the bridge. We stopped right in the center, and as a joke, a dare, we said the name out loud, just once. We stood there for 5 minutes, waiting. No rustling, no footsteps, no ghostly wail. Nothing. We laughed, hopped back on our bikes, and raced home, thinking it was all silly. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The name echoed in my head. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I felt a faint tremor under the mattress, like a cat had jumped up, but we didn't have a cat. Then the doorknob clicked twice. Softly. Like someone outside was gently testing it. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Nothing else happened, and I lay awake until sunrise. The next morning, I asked Leo if he'd come to my room. He just looked confused and said no. That evening, I was clearing plates in the kitchen when I saw a flash in the window's reflection. Not outside, but in the glass itself. It was a woman's back. I couldn't see her face, just a sheet of dark hair hanging down, long enough to blur her arms. I spun around, but the room was empty. Whatever I'd seen was taller than anyone in the house. After that, she started showing up more. I was biking through the orchard lanes and saw her standing motionless between the rows, towering over the trees. Her hair moved as if in a breeze, but the air was perfectly still. I blinked, and she was gone. Another time, I walked past Leo's room and saw someone inside, undressing in front of the mirror. It didn't make sense because Leo was outside with the dogs. I pushed the door open, ready to mess with him, but the room was cold and completely empty. The nights got worse. One night, I woke up to a heavy pressure at the foot of my bed. Not like someone sitting, but a deep compression, like something massive was crouching there. When I looked, I saw her, crouched down, so huge her head nearly brushed the ceiling, her hair pouring down like curtains on either side of the bed. I was paralyzed. Then, from under the bed, I heard a high, warped cry, like a child screaming underwater, which twisted into a low, rasping laugh I could feel in my ribs. I don't know how, but I forced myself upright. The moment I moved, it all stopped. The room was dead silent again, save for the sound of my own pounding heart. Another time, when my uncle and Leo were out late, I was alone in the living room, trying to read. The front door started rattling violently, like someone was kicking it. The knob twisted back and forth, hard, as if someone was trying to force their way in. I heard no footsteps, no voices, no shadows on the curtains, just the door shaking in its frame. I pressed my back against the wall, staring until it stopped. It ceased the exact moment I heard my uncle's truck rumble into the driveway. That was the final straw. I told him everything. He didn't look surprised. He just sighed and said, "Yeah, some of the field hands have mentioned her, too." He said they'd see a tall woman after dusk, moving through the rows, always facing away. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. That name on the bridge was supposed to hold her there. Saying it out loud had unanchored her. He said it like it was a simple fact, something everyone knew but didn't discuss. I asked why no one ever painted over it. He said people had tried. The paint wouldn't stick. The concrete wouldn't set. The name always came back. After that, I stopped reacting. I stopped saying the name. I kept the blinds shut after dark and my head down. Slowly, her presence weakened. The door stopped rattling. The footsteps faded. By summer's end, the house felt normal again. But the memory is still sharp. It taught me a lesson: there are old, patient things out there, and some of them are just waiting for someone foolish enough to call their name. It was that suspended time right after my first year of community college, where life felt unreal. My job had cut my hours, and my brain was buzzing with a restless energy. I didn't want to waste the summer. Two of my closest friends, Jonas and Theo, felt the same. What started as a joke became a plan: we'd pile into Jonas's beat-up Hyundai, drive west, and see what happened. California had a gravity for us, not just the coast, but the weird stories, the impossible tales people tell when they think no one's really listening. We scraped together our cash, grabbed a cooler of snacks and one sleeping bag each, and hit the road. The first few days were what you'd expect: sleeping in parking lots, eating terrible gas station food, stopping at every weird roadside attraction. We argued over stupid things, and the heat was starting to wear us down. Then, outside a dusty town called Ashfield, we stopped for gas. The station was stuck in the 80s. I went inside to pay while the others stretched their legs. The old guy behind the counter had long gray hair and a faded baseball cap. He was quiet until he overheard me on the phone, debating our route. He pointed a grimy finger toward the window and said, "There's an old road that cuts through the hills, Harrow Creek Road. Shaves off an hour." He drew a line on a laminated map. "You'll see a green sign. Turn there." As I took my receipt, he added, almost casually, "If someone waves you down on that road, don't stop. Doesn't matter who they are. Just drive." He said it like he'd said it too many times before, with no punchline, just a look that said he knew I'd slow down anyway. Back in the car, I told the others. They laughed. Theo did a bit pretending to be a haunted hitchhiker. We dismissed it, but that weird warning stuck with me. We found the green sign just as the sun was setting. The pavement turned to rough gravel, and the car rattled like it was falling apart. Jonas drove until he was too tired, then I took over while they both passed out. That's when things got strange. The gas gauge didn't move, even after an hour of driving uphill. Then I started passing the same dented road marker again and again: Harrow Creek, 3 miles. Same rust spot, same scratch. There were no turns, no forks, just the same road looping back on itself. And then I saw her. Standing just off the right shoulder, still as a statue. She wasn't pacing or thumbing a ride, just watching. Her dress was pale blue, the kind you'd see at a summer wedding decades ago. Delicate, but utterly out of place. Her hair was dark, neatly cut. She raised her hand in a small, casual wave. Not desperate. Familiar. I should have kept going. Every instinct screamed it. But I slowed down. She walked up to the window like she knew I would. She leaned in close enough for me to see the freckles under her eyes, and she said my name. Not a question. A statement. The way someone says it when they've known you your whole life. I was frozen. My mouth was dry. She smiled, a little sadly, and said, "You don't remember me, do you?" I managed to shake my head. She didn't look upset, more amused, like this was a game we'd played before. Then she started listing memories. Playing hooky together. Watching fireworks from the high school roof. Going to the old lake near her dad's cabin. Each one was vivid, detailed, and each one felt just close enough to reality that I started to doubt myself. Maybe I had forgotten. Maybe this was a life I'd left behind. I asked her how she knew me. That's when her face tightened. "You promised you wouldn't forget," she said, her voice still calm but with an edge that made my skin crawl. "We grew up together." In the back seat, Theo stirred, mumbling in his sleep. For a split second, I thought about unlocking the door, letting her explain, making it all make sense. But a deeper, primal instinct screamed that if she got into that car, I would never leave these hills. So I lied. I told her we were almost out of gas, that we couldn't take her. The light in her eyes just shut off. No anger, no pleading. Just gone. She took a step back. I blinked, and she vanished. Not walked away. Just wasn't there anymore. I should have kept going. Every instinct screamed it. But I slowed down. She walked up to the window like she knew I would. She leaned in close enough for me to see the freckles under her eyes, and she said my name. Not a question. A statement. The way someone says it when they've known you your whole life. I slammed the gas pedal. The car fishtailed, spitting gravel, but I didn't look back. The road seemed to stretch on forever, a looping nightmare, but eventually, it spat us out onto a real highway, glowing with lights and signs that felt like salvation. Jonas and Theo woke up, asking why I was driving like a maniac. I told them we'd taken a wrong turn. They didn't buy it, but they let it go. Weeks later, back home, I couldn't shake the memory of her voice. On a sleepless night, I searched online for Harrow Creek Ghost. I found it, buried in a forum thread titled Desert Roads That Shouldn't Exist. The entry was short: Harrow Creek Hitcher. Appears to lone travelers at night. Greets you by name. Shares false memories. Believed to be seeking someone to step into her missing life. Those who stop and let her in are never seen again. Vehicle disappears without a trace. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. I don't know what she was or why she picked me. I don't know how she knew my name or why her lies felt so familiar. But I know this: if anyone ever waves at me on a lonely road again, I won't stop. I'll just drive. I was 29, driving through Northern California just to get away from my job and the noise of the city. I wanted to sleep under trees and forget what my inbox looked like. I ended up on the back roads by accident, ignoring my GPS as it tried to reroute me to the highways. I'd see a narrow spur cutting into the hills or a sign for a beach with a name I didn't know, and I'd turn off. Most of those roads led to half-forgotten places, towns with boarded-up diners, forests so thick the light barely touched the ground. The redwoods were everywhere, massive and silent. And everyone I met had stories. Not just bare sightings, but strange, layered tales about things deeper in the woods, old rituals, symbols carved into trees, groups that met under the full moon. They were always told as an afterthought, not a warning, but maybe they were. I wasn't chasing folklore. I just liked solitude, camp coffee, and the sound of tires on dirt. I had my bike, my gear, and a vague plan to move south along the coast. But the deeper I went, the more the weirdness piled up. Little things at first. I'd find odd bundles, twine holding feathers or coins, hanging from branches near campsites. I'd hear what sounded like laughter late at night, but distant and not quite echoing right. I wrote most of it off to tiredness. On the second day, I followed a dirt road up into one of the denser stretches of forest. No signs, just a pull-out and an open gate. I parked, unloaded my bike, and started riding. The trail was wide and rutted at first, but within minutes, the trees thickened into walls, and I was inside a long, green tunnel. Everything felt muffled. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of my tires. That's when I saw the first strip of fabric tied to a branch at head height, frayed and sun-bleached, but knotted tight. I thought it was a trail marker. Then I saw another, exactly 20 feet later. Same cloth, same height. Then another, and another, perfectly spaced all the way down the trail. I stopped and got off my bike. Up close, the knot was oddly precise. Underneath the tree, someone had laid small, round stones in a spiral nearly 4 feet across. It wasn't random. It felt studied, intentional. I kept going, partly from curiosity, partly because it felt like a trail I wasn't supposed to follow, which made me want to follow it more. Half a mile later, I saw another formation, a circle with straight lines cutting through it like a wheel. Next to it, carved deep into the bark of a redwood, was a set of jagged, angular letters. Not English. Not any language I knew. They looked fresh, the exposed wood hadn't even darkened yet. That was the first moment I felt I'd crossed an invisible line. The trail finally climbed out of the trees and opened onto a ridge. It wasn't a natural clearing, the stumps were old, probably from logging. That's when I saw the cars. 3 of them, parked off in the brush, not wrecked, just dusty, tucked away like they didn't want to be seen. Each had decorations, dream catchers on mirrors, beads looped over headrests, one had feathers twisted into the windshield wipers. No one was inside. Then I heard the voices. Not loud, just conversation, soft and uneven, coming from deeper in the trees. I hid my bike and crept forward. Through a break in the branches, I saw them. 7 or 8 people were working in the clearing. They'd built a low, wooden frame from bent branches, like a flattened hut. Blankets were laid out. There were bundles of sticks arranged in circles. And not a single person was speaking. They moved in complete silence, passing objects, stacking logs. A man with a long gray beard and thin arms, wearing deep maroon robes, walked toward my hiding spot with an armful of firewood. He saw me. He didn't look surprised. He just nodded once. I said, "Hello." His voice was low, polite, completely flat. "We're almost done here," he said. Then he kept walking. The rest of the group never looked up. I stood there for a few more seconds, but no one acknowledged me. They just kept working in that synchronized silence. I wasn't an outsider, I was an intruder. I turned and walked fast back to my bike. I didn't run, but I didn't linger. I rode back to the car, every crunch of gravel suddenly too loud. I camped at a public lot next to a ranger station that night and didn't sleep much. The next morning, I went back. I had to see it in daylight. When I got to the ridge, everything was different. The cars were gone. The clearing was quiet. The wooden frame had collapsed inward, its edges lightly charred, as if they'd tried to burn it but changed their minds. Hanging from the broken poles were little cloth pouches, a dozen of them, tied with bright thread, each one bulging slightly. I didn't touch them. Circles had been drawn in the dirt all around the clearing, layered, spiraling, some crossing over themselves. At the far edge, on a wide, flat stump, something had been left behind, a piece of bone, bigger than my hand, set upright and perfectly balanced. I stared at it, and for a second, I thought I heard a faint humming. It could have been my pulse. It could have been nothing. I backed away slowly, got on my bike, and rode harder than I ever had in my life. I didn't stop until I saw my car. I didn't breathe right until I hit pavement. That was the end of my trip. I drove straight out of the county and didn't sleep in the woods again. A bunch of us rented an old ranch house near a place called Ryer's Hollow for my buddy Mason's birthday weekend. We'd heard about it through a friend of a friend who swore it was a steal, tons of land, cheap rates. There was a reason for that. The locals had a name for it, Teller's End. It sounded like a campfire story. Some said it was an old stagecoach stop where a man named Teller was ambushed. Others claimed it was built over a lost mining trail where whole crews vanished. One woman at a gas station told us, dead serious, that it was on a path settlers used when they were ready to vanish, not abandon, vanish. We laughed. We weren't there for legends. There were 8 of us, college friends and plus ones, there to be loud, stupid, and drunk in the middle of nowhere. The house was massive, a long, low ranch-style place with weirdly high ceilings and furniture that hadn't moved since the 90s. Half the cabinets were empty, the fridge smelled like stale coffee, but the beds were clean and the backyard was huge, with a fire pit and no neighbors for miles. Perfect. Mason and I shared the master bedroom. We'd been close since sophomore year. He wasn't tall, but solid, like a fridge that learned how to throw a football. He was calm, rarely raised his voice. That's why what happened hit so hard. His old roommate Jonah was there too, a compact guy with restless energy, always cracking his knuckles or whistling, messing with stuff. The first night, we lit the fire pit around 10. It was chilly. Someone had a Bluetooth speaker, and someone else found a binder the host left in the kitchen. Inside were house rules and a printed local legend. Jonah read it out in a fake dramatic voice. It said the property used to belong to a gold prospector who built a well. But it wasn't just any well. According to the story, it moved. It would show up in different places on the land, outside a guest window one night, near the tree line the next. Visitors claimed they saw it plain as day, but in the morning, there'd be nothing but grass. We joked about it all night. Every time someone went to pee in the dark, someone else yelled, "Watch out for the well." Mason was a few beers past his limit, leaning back in his chair, grinning, testing gravity. Around midnight, Jonah passed around some edibles from an Altoids tin. Said they were light. They weren't. He and Mason wandered off into the field behind the house, laughing, pushing each other, holding solo cups, disappearing into the dark. I stayed back, went inside, flopped on the bed, and FaceTimed my girlfriend. We'd been talking for maybe 10 minutes when I heard a knock at the bedroom door. Just one. I ignored it. Then another, harder. The doorknob turned, and the door opened. Block 3 of 5. Mason and Jonah walked in. They looked like they'd been through something. Mason's shirt was streaked with mud, his arms had thin, red scratches. He walked like his limbs were too heavy, like he had to think about each step. Jonah was still laughing, but his voice was higher, tighter. Mason leaned into me like he was about to fall. I reached out to catch him, but then he stood straight. His face changed. His head tilted, and his expression went blank, like he didn't recognize me. Then he shoved me, hard, sending me stumbling back into the dresser. I laughed, thinking he was playing. The laugh died when his hand wrapped around my throat. Tight. No warning. Instant pressure. I couldn't breathe. I tried to say his name. Jonah froze for a second, then jumped in, trying to pull him off, but Mason didn't flinch. His eyes just stared into mine, unblinking, like he was watching a screen. I clawed at his wrist, but I couldn't budge it. Jonah finally wedged himself between us and shoved Mason back. I dropped to the floor, gasping. I barely had time to breathe before Mason lunged again, his arm wrapping around my neck from behind. Everything started to go narrow, like a tunnel. I screamed, barely a sound. Jonah yanked at him again, but Mason's grip was ridiculous, like his strength had been multiplied. I scrambled back toward the dresser and grabbed the first thing my hand found, my pocket knife, unpacked earlier. I flicked it open and held it up. Mason's eyes flickered for a second. A crack of recognition. I shouted at him to stop. Jonah told me to put the knife down. I did. I thought maybe he'd snapped out of it, but then he lunged again. So I tackled him. My shoulder hit his ribs, and we crashed into the hallway wall. A lamp fell and shattered. Jonah jumped in, and together we pushed him, bit by bit, through the house, past the kitchen, into the living room. Mason grabbed a half-empty bottle of Mountain Dew and poured it over my head. No expression. No reason. Sticky soda ran into my eyes and ears. I slipped, banging my elbow so hard it went numb. He let out one sharp, barking laugh. Then nothing. Blank face again. Jonah and I grabbed him by his arms and legs, dragged him to the front door, opened it, shoved him out, and locked it. He started pounding immediately, screaming my name, calling me a coward. Then, silence. Total silence. Except for low breathing under the door crack. Then he started whispering. At first, it was too low to understand. Then came the words, clear and measured, tell her about the well. Jonah stared at me. I stared back. We hadn't said a word to him about the well all night. No reason he should have brought that up. Tell her about the well, he repeated, louder. Then silence again. I peeked through the side window. He wasn't banging anymore. Just standing, stone still, arms at his sides, eyes straight ahead. I asked Jonah if they'd seen anything out there. He hesitated, then nodded. Said there was a weird stone circle about 30 feet out. Looked like the top of a well, filled with dirt. No depth, just a ring of old, mossy rocks and soil. Mason had stared into it for a long time. Jonah said he tried to talk to him, but Mason wasn't responding. Then he said, Mason started speaking, but not in his own voice. That's when I told my girlfriend to call the sheriff. 2 deputies showed up about 10 minutes later. Mason didn't run. Didn't argue. Just sat on the steps, calm, waiting. He didn't say a single word. Didn't look at us. They took him in for observation. He's out now. We don't talk. No one does. I drove to his apartment the next morning. It was empty. Mailbox stuffed with flyers like no one had lived there in weeks. I went to the garage where he worked weekends. The owner said he didn't know who I was talking about. I asked around town. No one remembered him. Not even at the bar we went to every Friday for 2 years. It was like he'd been lifted out of the world and scrubbed clean. It's never just a story when you're the one inside it. I was 15 when I first heard the stories about a place everyone called Hollow Creek. It was just another stretch of dry land tucked behind the hills near Whitlow. They said the creek bed changed, not over years, but in real time. Paths would twist into new routes, walls of earth would appear where there had been none, and familiar turns would suddenly lead you somewhere completely different. Most adults wrote it off as small-town superstition, the desert heat playing tricks on the mind. But even if they didn't believe it, they never encouraged anyone to go out there either. That summer, right before school started, a few of us decided to go see for ourselves. It was a dare, really. A mission to prove it was all nothing. There were 6 of us, bored, restless kids looking for a thrill. We had no real plan, just backpacks with water and a reckless amount of confidence. One of us was a kid named Rook. That wasn't his real name, but it fit. He was quiet, hard to read, and some people mistakenly thought he was slow. But those of us who knew him understood he noticed things the rest of us missed. He had a sharpness that only revealed itself when you paid close attention. We set out early to beat the heat, hiking past the last houses of Whitlow until we felt like we were in another world. The hills were wide and empty, all sunburned stone and dry grass. The creek wasn't hard to find. It was a deep, quiet trench clawed into the land, utterly silent. No water, no sound. We slid down into it, and the world immediately felt muted. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of our footsteps on the dry dirt. The walls rose high, sometimes blocking out the sky. We dropped our bags and split up, staying within earshot. Rook, full of energy, darted ahead as usual, pointing out animal tracks and oddly bent branches, vanishing and reappearing farther down the creek bed. Then, he didn't reappear. We waited, figuring he was hiding, ready to jump out and scare us. We called his name. Nothing. We shouted louder. Still nothing. We walked around the next bend, expecting a prank, but the creek was empty. A quiet, unnerving silence had settled in. We split into pairs, thinking he'd wandered down a side path. But the farther we went, the less the place made sense. Turns that should have looped back led to dead ends. Open spaces now had walls. A gentle slope had become a sharp drop. It wasn't just unfamiliar, it was fundamentally wrong. We climbed out to get a better view, but from above, it just looked like a normal, shallow crack in the land. When we climbed back down, everything had shifted again. The stretch we just left was gone, replaced by steep dirt walls and a bend we'd never seen. It was as if the ground was folding itself into new shapes every time we looked away. We called for Rook until our voices were raw, marking the walls with rocks and sticks, but the marks would vanish or appear in the wrong places. By mid-afternoon, we were sunburned, exhausted, and deeply scared. We left because there was nothing else we could do. Telling his parents was the worst part. We stammered through it, saying he'd wandered off and we'd lost him. We never mentioned the shifting paths or the impossible walls. We knew how it would sound. The town launched a massive search. Parties combed the hills, helicopters buzzed the ridges, and dogs sniffed through the dust. They found nothing. No trace. No sign. Just silence. And then, life just moved on. But for us, it never did. Years dragged me forward, college, a job, marriage, kids. I built a life, but Rook's absence was always there, an unfinished sentence in the back of my mind. Then, one summer while visiting family in Whitlow, my dad mentioned something offhand over breakfast. Construction crews were digging out near Hollow Creek for a new development. They'd found bones. I stopped breathing. They identified the remains. It was Rook. The coroner found no signs of foul play. The official conclusion was that he got trapped, maybe buried in a landslide. Something simple. Something neat. But we had been right behind him. We had searched every inch. There was no landslide, no trap. The creek had taken him. Before they paved it over, I went back one last time. The place looked smaller, broken, half filled with debris as if someone had tried to erase it. I didn't stay long. Back then, I believed a landscape could be just a place. Now I know better. Some places are hungry.